Murderous Minors is brought to you by Canva. Making content is an essential part of what I do to keep this show going, but it hasn't always been a seamless creative process because I handle every aspect of the show myself. Between researching and writing scripts and recording and editing each episode, I don't have a lot of energy left to put towards designing new and effective marketing tools every single week, but I've found my secret weapon with Canva. Ever since I found Canva Pro, I can design anything like a pro on any device, which is just so helpful to be able to work seamlessly between my iPhone, iPad, and MacBook because you just never know when inspiration will strike. Canva Pro is an amazingly fast and fun design platform that empowers you to create and share stunning content in just a few clicks. You can start from scratch or choose from thousands of templates that are easy to customize with endless premium fonts, photos, videos, and so much more that add personality and edge to whatever you're designing. My favorite Canva Pro feature has got to be the huge selection of photos available to Pro members, and I can always find one that just feels right. And designing together has never been easier. Sharing, editing, and commenting in real time, all while helping your team stay organized and on the same page. And you and 4 teammates can unlock everything Canva Pro has to offer for just $12.99 a month. Design like a pro with Canva Pro. Right now, you can get a free 45-day extended trial when you use my promo code. Just go to canva.me/warbaby to get your free 45-day extended trial. That's canva.me/warbaby, canva.me/warbaby.
Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 107, Unforgiven and Alone. Warbaby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. For more than 40 years, the specter of 16-year-old female school shooter Brenda Spencer has continued to loom large, with her name, face, and actions being remembered anew when bullets fly on a campus full of children, or the song inspired by her crimes plays on a classics radio station. Back on January 29, 1979, the young students of Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California, stepped onto campus with hope in their hearts that a fun day would be had by all, only to walk directly into gunfire coming from an unknown location. On this episode of Murderous Minors, we take a trip in the Wayback Machine to Southern California at the dawn of the 1980s and the Cleveland Elementary School shooting, one of the first of the modern era. My main sources for this episode are Spencer's parole hearing transcripts and archival news footage, along with Dr. Peter Langman's Brenda Spencer, sorting out the contradictions. Allegations of child abuse and sexual abuse did come up in this case, so we'll discuss that, and there's also talk of suicide attempts in addition to the senseless violence that day so many years ago, so please be advised. Some call Spencer the first modern-day school shooter as she was a juvenile. She was technically in the 11th grade at Patrick Henry High School when the attack on the elementary school students took place. She had history with the school, though, and went there after her parents divorced when she was 9 years old. They'd married in 1954 and divorced in 1972, with Spencer's mother keeping the marital home and her father, who was the supervisor of the audiovisual department at San Diego State University, buying a house very close to his old one in the San Carlos neighborhood and across the street from Cleveland Elementary School on Lake Atlan Avenue. So, though custody of Brenda, 9, and her siblings, who were 13 and 15, was given to their father, they remained in close enough proximity to their mother to see her daily if they wanted to. She was the bookkeeper for the Andy Williams San Diego Golf Tournament and volunteered with the local Junior Golf Association, which all 3 of the Spencer children participated in. They were excellent golfers, but after the divorce, that stopped, and Brenda, being so much younger than her siblings, was eventually the last one left at home with her father, with whom she seemed to have a normal relationship. But how things seemed in 1979 and how Spencer wants us to see them in retrospect are 2 completely different stories. In the decades leading up to now, she's claimed that behind the doors of her father's suburban middle-class home there was neglect, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Spencer described herself in 2009 as having been abused by her father since the age of 9, but as being depressed as early as 6 and beginning to self-harm by cutting around the age of 10. She described her mother as close in physical proximity after the divorce, but as emotionally distant, saying that the only time the kids saw her was when they went to her house, and even then, she acted detached and showed little interest. Nothing in the investigations done in 1979 support any of these claims, as those who knew her described her as a cheerful child who smiled often. Her mother described her as being an avid reader and a writer of poetry who had a love of art and photography as well as for animals, and mentioned tentative plans to become a veterinarian when she grew up. She shared a close relationship with her siblings and particularly idolized her older brother. As the years went on, father and daughter developed a shared interest in hunting and shooting and visited their vacation property about an hour away in Potrero, California almost every weekend, sometimes with her friend Brant, the younger boy who lived next door. While there, the trio shot pellet guns, and by late January 1979, after her friend had moved away, the .22 caliber rifle that Mr. Spencer had given his 16-year-old daughter just a few weeks prior as a Christmas gift. Though she would go on to claim otherwise, her mother and sister both later reported that Spencer had specifically requested this gift. She and the neighbor boy hung out for several years, actually, and he was one of the very few friends Brenda had. The pair had gotten into a few scrapes with the law during their time hanging out, including in June of 1975, when Brant snatched some random ammunition and a couple of cokes from behind the counter at a drugstore, telling police it was Brenda Spencer who had put him up to it. After running from security at the store, she was identified and she and her father were required to participate in counseling, after which the case was dropped. Roughly 2.5 years later, the young friends found themselves in trouble again, and this time much closer to home, as they were busted in January 1978, vandalizing a classroom in the very school that Spencer would open fire on just about exactly 1 year later. In the January 1978 incident, the teens broke windows and broke into the school building, and when police caught up with them this time, the consequences were more severe. Spencer was sent to juvenile hall, where it was noted that, quote, she did not seem to take discipline seriously. She was also referred to the Youth Service Bureau, and when evaluated was deemed a, quote, tomboy, being without female influence or role models, but having no outstanding problems that would require a referral to other agencies. Though she popped in for sessions occasionally with her counselor throughout the first half of 1978, notes indicate that although she tended to put up barriers and was resistant to probing questions, she seemed resentful that her parents' divorce had resulted in distance between her family members. Spencer's attendance at Patrick Henry High School was sporadic up until her incarceration, and although a good student in photography class, she excelled nowhere else and seemed to prefer being a loner. According to Spencer, at 12 years old, she began smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, and abusing mind-altering street drugs like LSD and PCP, and popping pills like Seconal, a now-defunct short-acting barbiturate used to sedate patients before a medical procedure. Spencer talked a lot about doing hardcore drugs both before and after the shootings. However, her older sister reported that she was only aware of the pot smoking. At the age of 14, she had hit her head in what has been reported several times as a bicycle accident, an injury which resulted in headaches and periods of blacking out. She'd sustained a head injury around 5 years of age, too, and suffered from epilepsy believed to have been caused by the multiple untreated head injuries and for which she took medication. Teens who knew Spencer around that time spoke of an awkward teen who harbored a love of guns and violent TV shows like SWAT and a hatred of police. A neighbor said that just a few weeks earlier, Spencer had said that she wanted to, quote, blow a police officer's head off. She also spoke openly about wanting to shoot police officers and was known for loving the rocker Alice Cooper and sitting silently in the backs of her classrooms. One teen described Spencer as having dug a backyard tunnel to hide in. They also purported that she had made a corner of her garage into a, quote, fortress where she could keep her gun and weapons. But Spencer would later describe the area as a place to hide from her family's constant abuse, which no one else inside or outside of the family had mentioned back in 1979 or in the years since. She was remembered as a loner at school, but not an unhappy one, as she didn't seem sad about having few friends. Her truancy issues got her transferred to Garfield Extended Day School, a continuation school, but she did return to Patrick Henry High School at some point prior to her arrest. She didn't necessarily have issues in school, she simply didn't want to be there. Those who lived around her recalled her love for animals, but also that she talked about violence often and was sort of a wannabe troublemaker, though her sister would later say that she was just a big talker when it came to topics like abusing neighborhood cats, drugs, or guns, someone who said things but didn't do them or even know what she was talking about. It's assumed that Spencer's later claims of being heavily intoxicated at the time of the shooting were concocted to deflect responsibility and make it seem as though she was far too under the influence to think clearly or premeditate. At least one classmate stated that she was known to smoke marijuana regularly and was remembered to have tried PCP in the past, but that didn't necessarily mean she was intoxicated on that day. The teen's claims of being on a bender that week remain in dispute to this day, but her former next-door neighbor and partner in petty crime bolstered the idea that the crime was premeditated when he made it known that Spencer had seen him just days before the shootings, telling him that something big enough to be on the news was in the works. Of course, she at first tried to say that she was referencing an upcoming party, but eventually claimed that none of this ever happened. He described them later as having had an active fantasy life when they were younger, concocting what they called plans that saw them disarming police out on patrol. When Spencer told him to keep an eye on the television news, he thought it was just part of their elaborate fantasy world. Spencer would describe him as being a big talker, just as her sister described her. In the letter she wrote to the parole board in 1993, Spencer said, quote, "I was and had been for many days before that incident heavily under the influence of a lot of street drugs I had been taking. I had been doing uppers and downers combined with PCP and straight alcohol for several days before the incident. Then that morning I stayed home from school and started doing more. I started taking some pills which I thought were Seconals that I had got from someone on the streets, and I was taking these while smoking PCP and drinking straight whiskey. I started to hallucinate. I saw these commando types, all these people in paramilitary gear advancing on me from out of the schoolyard. It was so real. I barricaded myself in, got my rifle, and started firing." Whether hallucinations led up to the ambush or not, we do know for sure that just around 8:30 a.m. on Monday, January 29, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer used the .22 caliber hunting rifle she had just gotten for Christmas to take aim on Cleveland Elementary School. As parents unknowingly let their youngsters out of their safe vehicles and into the line of fire, Spencer took aim at their children's colorful winter coats. While having coffee with one of the teachers, the principal, Mr. Ragg, witnessed through the window an 8-year-old student being gunned down by an unknown assailant. After running immediately to her aid, he was quickly shot in the chest. As Principal Ragg lay wounded, his 56-year-old co-worker Michael Sukar ran to his rescue, and he too was shot in the chest. 53-year-old Burton Ragg, who had only been the principal of Cleveland Elementary School for 5 months, died later while in surgery, having given his life to try and save his students. He left behind a wife, 1 daughter, and 2 sons. His widow of 25 years never remarried and said in a 1997 statement, quote, "3 fatherless children were numbed. Today there are 6 grandchildren asking what happened to their grandfather and why." The school's head custodian, Michael Sukar, known to the kids as Mr. Mike, also died, killed while trying to aid his wounded colleague. The decorated veteran left behind his wife and 1 son. He had served in the Navy for 21 years and was a Seabee during World War II, surviving 2 submarine sinkings. His son painstakingly revealed how he found out his father had been injured in a letter he wrote to the parole board decades later. The younger Mr. Sukar detailed how his wife heard on the radio that there'd been a shooting at his father's school and that a custodian was involved. She soon got a call saying that her father-in-law was in the hospital. He said that he rushed home and set out with his wife to tell his mother what had happened, finding her singing in the garden when they arrived. Once at the hospital, they didn't find him resting comfortably in a room or in surgery, but in the basement morgue. He went on to say that his mother, who had met his father in northern Germany while he was a member of the Allied occupied forces, lived the next decade depressed, lonely, and scared, dying only 12 years after her husband in 1991. In addition to the 2 school employees who were killed, 1 police officer and 8 students were shot and survived. 8-year-old Mary had been shot through the abdomen but didn't tell anyone for hours. Only once she had been evacuated to nearby Pershing Junior High School with the other students and was located by her mother did the woman find a bullet hole in her daughter's jacket. In addition to 8-year-old Mary, the wounded were 7-year-old Audrey, who was shot in the elbow and had burn marks on the inside of each thigh from a bullet that had passed through. 10-year-old Crystal, 9-year-old Christy, 10-year-old Julie, 9-year-old Cam, who was shot from back to front with the bullet passing just 1 inch from his heart, 9-year-old Monica, and 8-year-old Gregory, who had to go back to school and grow up with the bullet fired by Brenda Spencer lodged behind his pelvic bone and extremely close to delicate nerves. 9-year-old Christy was the only one of the injured kids who didn't go back to school that year after spending more than a month in the hospital recovering from 2 major colon operations and injuries to her foot and toes. Audrey's older sister had holes in her coat pockets where bullets had passed through, and an actual bullet inside her backpack where a notebook had stopped it from causing any damage. All 8 children who were shot survived their physical injuries, while the extent of the psychological torment left behind varied from slight to lasting for more than 40 years. The injured officer, 28-year-old Robert Robb, was a rookie with less than 1 year on the job. He was one of the first on scene and was almost immediately shot in his ballistic vest, with the bullet ricocheting off of it and striking him in the neck. He received the Medal of Valor for his bravery and never returned to the force following his recovery. It finally took another officer flagging down a garbage truck to stop the carnage. The truck was pulled up to block the path of the bullets coming from the Spencer home so that the wounded could be evacuated for treatment and the other children outside could be corralled and taken to safety. As the SWAT team moved into the quiet middle-class neighborhood, police contacted Spencer by phone several times, trying to negotiate with her. Reporters for the San Diego Evening Tribune called inadvertently when trying to reach her neighbors, going on to famously report that she said, quote, "The thought just popped into my head last Wednesday, I think," and that she, quote, "didn't like Mondays. This livens up the day." She ended with, quote, "I have to go now. I shot a pig, I think, and I want to shoot some more," and several other comments that Spencer would later say she didn't remember making. At no time did she tell them that she'd been drinking, doing drugs, or hallucinating, and she was reportedly able to carry on multiple conversations with law enforcement and the media over a 6-hour period. By around 2:30 p.m., the teen hung up on police negotiators, and a half an hour later, Spencer exited her home and placed her .22 rifle with telescopic sight and her pellet gun down on the driveway. Open bottles of alcohol were found inside the messy house, and it was determined later that Spencer had broken into her father's locked RV the night before and taken the ammunition stored from there. 36 spent shell casings were found inside the house, along with hundreds of live rounds. Police took the teen into custody, charged with 2 counts of murder and nearly 20 other felonies, including 9 counts of attempted murder. The principal of Patrick Henry High School discouraged the questioning of her classmates on that day because they were, quote, "high as a kite right now." Spencer was bound over to adult court that March, and her trial was scheduled for a few months later, in late July 1979. A few weeks before, the defense requested a change of venue after telephone polling in the area led them to believe that she wouldn't be able to get a fair trial in San Diego County. The pre-trial publicity had admittedly begun while the shooting was still happening. Though the defense team was pushing for the trial to take place somewhere in Los Angeles County, it was the city of Santa Ana in Orange County, California that was ultimately selected as the new location due to its closer proximity, as the prosecution alone was planning to call upwards of 70 total witnesses who lived about an hour and a half away in San Diego. Spencer waived her right to a speedy trial, and her original July date was vacated, and a new trial date was set for October 1st, 1979. She had pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and her attorney contended that her, quote, "temporal lobe epilepsy caused her to lose control of herself." As the trial date loomed, a local radio station played a new song by the Boomtown Rats, a rock group from Ireland headed by Bob Geldof called "I Don't Like Mondays," clearly based on the crimes committed by Spencer at Cleveland Elementary School. Her attorney worried that it would cause undue emotional stress on the surviving victims, but the song went on to become a cult classic. Radio stations in the area stopped playing the song, but it only grew in popularity. The following year, the Boomtown Rats planned a San Diego concert but canceled following loud protestation. The group gracefully bowed out, with Geldof saying that, quote, "we will not be a party to cheap morality. Our presence there would only fan the slowly cooling embers." On October 1st, 1979, Brenda Ann Spencer changed her pleas to guilty, foregoing a trial and dismissing 9 counts of attempted murder. She cried openly as she admitted, quote, "I shot from my house and killed 2 people. On April 4th, 1980, one day after she turned 18, she was sentenced to 2 terms of 25 years to life for first-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon, and 7 years for shooting Officer Robb, all to be served concurrently. Spencer went up for parole the first time in 1993, where she waived her appearance, writing the letter we heard part of earlier instead. In that letter, she also stated a secondary toxicology report showed the presence of at least 1 drug in her system, her epilepsy medication, which the official report from the San Diego Police Department did not detect. She also claimed that she was heavily dosed with prescription medications as soon as she arrived in jail, so much so that she didn't even realize that she'd taken a plea deal. Parole was denied, but the following year, Spencer testified at a subsequent parole consideration hearing in December 1994, where she said she didn't remember committing the shootings at all, but also said that she wasn't aiming, just shooting straight up into the air. She described herself as being depressed and suicidal back in early 1979, and the possibility was floated that the shootings were actually an attempt at suicide by cop. Spencer said then that she didn't think it was. That parole attempt was also denied, and she withdrew her 1998 parole request at the last minute, leaving her unable to seek parole again until 2001. Her attorney said that she was remorseful, but he was also confident that she would be denied again, which was one reason that she chose to withdraw her request for release. She'd been incarcerated for more than 18 years in 1998. Spencer showed up to her next scheduled parole hearing in April of 2001, just after she had to undergo a psychological evaluation after saying she'd been hearing voices, and using a hot paperclip to brand herself with what prison authorities said were the words pride and courage on her chest. She said that she thought now that her father had given her the gun for Christmas so she could use it to take her own life, although her mother and sister had specifically said just after the shootings that Spencer had bugged her father to buy her a rifle for Christmas of 1978. The then 39-year-old also said that, quote, "With every school shooting, I feel I'm partly responsible. What if they got their idea from what I did? I know saying I'm sorry doesn't make it all right." She was denied for the third time. In that 2001 testimony, Spencer introduced a past of sexual abuse by her father, a claim that the state said she had never brought up, either before the shootings or in the 22 years since they'd taken place. Her attorney, however, pointed out 2 psychological evaluations from 1979 that he said could be read differently 20 years later, and that through a more contemporary lens, Spencer's personality fit that of a person who had been abused. Her father visited her on a regular basis throughout the entirety of her incarceration and continued living in the same house until his death in 2016. Her first defense attorney did say in 2019 that he believed that it was her father's influence that led Brenda Spencer to shoot guns as a hobby and refuse to dress like her peers, as she was known to dress more like her brother. When questioned about her earlier self-mutilation at the 2005 parole hearing, she said that the ruin symbols carved into her chest did not stand for, quote, courage and pride as previously reported, but for, quote, unforgiven and alone. Her description of a feeling of calm overtaking her as she dragged the burning hot end of a paperclip over her skin alarmed those whose purpose it was to find her fit or unfit for release. Also at the 2005 hearing, the fabled second toxicology report was determined to be located inside Spencer's central file, the very one she said showed that she'd been under the influence that day. What it actually said, according to her attorney's description to the parole board, was that a barbiturate-like substance and alcohol were found in her blood along with an unknown chemical. The first toxicology report that contained all negative readings was also in the file, though it was noted that marijuana was not tested for, and neither was LSD or PCP. Also at the 2005 hearing, Spencer's once 9-year-old victim Cam testified to keep her behind bars. Even almost 30 years later, the boy who cheated death by 1 inch still altered his behavior in ways that were born the day Brenda Spencer shot him in the chest. He actually attended all of the parole hearings so far and testified several times as to the devastation the shooting caused him. Despite her lengthy attempt at explaining her actions, Spencer was denied parole for the 4th time. The district attorney pointed out that her, quote, sniper-type behavior resulted in an accuracy rate of more than 30% at a distance of 150 feet, which would be remarkable for a shooter who was aiming at the sky. The 2005 parole hearing offered the most comprehensive look at the physical abuse and sexual abuse allegations Spencer levied against her father, but that he never made any statements about. The commissioner's questions led to Spencer saying that her father had touched her inappropriately by fondling her, with the abuse ultimately leading to sodomy. She denied intercourse, but at first was confused as to the difference between intercourse and sodomy, until her attorney explained it to her during a recess. When Spencer was denied for the fourth time in 2005, no conclusive evidence of abuse had been presented, though one report did deem parts of her previous allegations as seemingly credible. There are so many psychological examination reports pertaining to this case as it has now covered more than 4 decades, but throughout her various interviews she revealed different bits of information to different doctors, making it hard to piece together an accurate depiction of her home life as a teen at that time. She had not ever mentioned physical or sexual abuse and was ultimately diagnosed with depression, chronic complex PTSD, antisocial personality disorder, and schizoaffective disorder over the years, requiring antidepressants and antipsychotics. This episode is brought to you by MyFitnessPal. Being healthier and getting fitter doesn't have to be a first of the week or first of the year kind of thing, and with MyFitnessPal, you can learn what works specifically for you. As a longtime user of MyFitnessPal, I have to admit that I did first try it out to track nutritional information and to log my activity, but I soon realized that my version of healthy can look different from yours, but we can still be on the right path for us. MyFitnessPal Premium members can customize the app to really get whatever we need to help meet our goals like heart health or low-carb eating, and Premium's deeper nutritional insights help you figure out the best ways to fuel your body. I personally came to MyFitnessPal years ago to count macros, but how I wanted to, not with a plan based on people like me, and I've never looked back. With MyFitnessPal, you're getting a community as well, with support from other users and plans developed by professionals, so whatever you need to be successful, there's someone there to help. MyFitnessPal does way more than just count calories. Get the support you need to meet your health goals. Unlock all the amazing things MyFitnessPal can do like I did. Start your premium membership today. Go to warbaby.myfitnesspal.com and use code WARBABY to get a 1-month premium membership for free. That's warbaby.myfitnesspal.com, code WARBABY for a free 1-month premium membership. warbaby.myfitnesspal.com. Inconsistencies in the statements of Spencer's father and sister were also addressed as they pertain to specific instances of abuse, as well as her sleeping arrangements when she was younger. It was known that she and her father had slept in the same room, but whether or not it was in the same bed remains in question. A 2005 investigative report based on the investigation into Spencer for the parole board included a statement by Dr. Connie Axelrod which read, quote, "There are suspicions of inappropriate behavior between her and her father, and there may be family secrets that others will never acknowledge or discuss. This is not uncommon in such families." At her 2009 parole hearing, Spencer said that she was just shooting that day and that she hadn't meant to kill anyone. She now stated that her motivation for firing on the school was to initiate a suicide by cop situation. Spencer also alleged a lot more physical abuse in 2009 than she'd ever mentioned in the past, saying that she got hit in the face all the time and had even been kicked in the head, resulting in the injuries that her father had passed off as having occurred in that bicycle accident. She said that her older sister took her to the emergency room after their father went to work, though she didn't require hospitalization. Her lawyer told the court that following the attack, Spencer hobbled to her mother's house, but the woman failed to act. Worried that since she didn't have custody, she also didn't have the right to seek medical attention for her daughter. Now, all of that information came from Spencer herself and was first presented at her 5th parole hearing. while according to Dr. Peter Langman, author of Brenda Spencer Sorting Out the Contradictions, a 1979 private investigator determined from her other family members that at 14 years old, Spencer had ridden her bicycle into a pole, hitting her head and becoming dizzy for at least one day. The head-kicking incident likely never happened, though she had her lawyer talk about it in court. More discussion was had regarding her recent allegations of sexual abuse against her father, with the presiding commissioner pointing out that she hadn't specifically mentioned abuse in any previous psychological evaluations, to which she explained that she'd been taught not to discuss family business. In her letter to the board read aloud during the hearing, Spencer stated that, quote, "When I was 9 years old, my father started touching me and fondling me. I had to sleep in the same bed with him, and almost every night he would do something. How and why would my father, who was supposed to take care of me and watch over me, do things that were so very wrong to me? It really messed up my head. Also, as one of the steps in a group, I confronted my father about the abuse. He apologized to me for what he had done, which is probably the best I can hope for. Me and my father have come to terms with the past." In regards to her older brother and sister, Spencer wrote that he, quote, "would also smack me around and grab me by my throat and toss me around. My father, brother, and sister all verbally abused me, constantly telling me I was a piece of shit who would never amount to anything. They would go on and on about what a loser I was and always would be." No one had ever said these things before or heard these things before, and Spencer's brother and sister said when interviewed just after the shootings that she and her father had a pretty great relationship and that he did whatever she wanted. She was also known to have had an adoration for her older brother, though her sister did point out that Spencer had been a tedious and difficult child to deal with. She was remembered by some as stubborn and even manipulative, though father and daughter were seen to have had a loving relationship. She was assigned no chores, and their father spent a great deal of time with their younger sister and on trying to make her happy. Spencer's sister also reported that she felt as though her sister liked their mother's house better because of her lack of rules. Parole was denied for the 5th time in 2009, with the board granting a 10-year denial instead of 15, because they did see that she had stayed disciplinary infraction-free for almost 30 years. They advised her to spend more time in therapy and in programs, and their decision did include, quote, "Ma'am, even in the face of such a horrific crime, you can work your way out on parole," giving many of Spencer's supporters the feeling that the next hearing will see her released. Interestingly, early in his daughter's incarceration, Mr. Spencer became acquainted with a younger girl who quite resembled his daughter Brenda. He married her upon her release from juvenile detention and promptly had a baby with her, raising his last daughter in the house across the street from Cleveland Elementary School. Concerned citizens even questioned if Brenda had been released once her father had married her former friend, as the two women looked so much alike. Spencer's much younger half-sister became close with her over the years and even wrote a letter in support of her release for the 2009 parole hearing. Her latest hearing had been postponed from 2019 to September 2021, however. Spencer waived that hearing and a new one was scheduled for September 2022. Brenda Ann Spencer will turn 60 years old in 2022, just a few months before her next scheduled parole hearing. She remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Corona, California. Michael Sukar's brother and sister-in-law said in their 2009 victim impact statement something similar to what we talk about often, which is that, quote, "the victims are not only those killed, but those survivors who lived the tragedy the rest of their lives." Grover Cleveland Elementary School was demolished years later and replaced with a housing subdivision, with a memorial to Burton Ragg and Michael Sukar, paid for by local citizens, installed at the corner of Lake Atlan Avenue and Lake Angela Street in San Diego, California.
Hi, it's Jonathan Cotton with the Good Feet Store, and I've shared before how I love an organization called TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Recently, we invited some TAPS family members who had lost a military loved one to have dinner with us. As we listened to their stories, I was reminded again of how the loss of a military loved one is such a devastating experience. Not only is the loved one gone, but often they lose their military community, and sometimes an entire lifestyle. My heart was sad over their grief, yet my spirit was inspired by their courage. Then to top it off, I was amazed at their graciousness as they thanked us for just listening. At the Good Feet Store, we love helping you get out of pain and back into the life you love, and we love supporting the work of TAPS. Come in today for your free fitting and test walk and ask any of our team members why TAPS is an organization that every American can support. Visit goodfeet.com for the location nearest you.
Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.